tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, hari mai. Kiti whare wananga o Tamaki Makura. Okay. No reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Very warm welcome to the University of Auckland, and greetings to all of you. Now, just a few preliminary pieces of information here is first the bathrooms. If you go out and turn left, the bathrooms are first on the right, and you'll see men and female toilets on the left-hand side going in that direction. If there's an emergency, we should all come out of this this room here, turn right, and go outside. Okay, and there'll be assembly places out there in the case of an emergency. Now, I would like to thank the sponsors for this event. The Energy Education Trust sponsored the Student Happy Hour and the Writing for Scientific Journals. Transpower, Vector, and Z Energy were also sponsors, and I'd like to acknowledge their contribution to the conference. As you know, we faced challenges organising the conference, and I think it's a testament to the, if I can use the word, the resilience of the organisation, both the association, but also the people, the local people here who had to adjust our program. We're in the process of refunding registrations and so on. So it has been a fairly challenging organisational exercise. If I could just mention a little bit about the coronavirus episode as it affects the university here. We've had restrictions in place, travel restrictions in place since, if I recall correctly, February the 3rd. So faculty at the university have not been able to travel to China from that date. The university has, it's a large university. We have about 45,000 students enrolled in the university, and about 2,000 of those students are in China right now, and they cannot return to New Zealand. So when you're travelling around the university, please be aware of the cultural diversity, the ethnic diversity at the university here, because there will be students from Asia who have not left New Zealand. So I just alert you to that during your stay here. If you want further information, then I think there's information on the website about exactly what is in place vis-a-vis the virus outbreak. So with that, I think that's all my housekeeping notes here, and now I'd like to ask Yukuri to address you as President of the Association. Thank you.
Yes, only. And how do I operate the slide?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Hope you got up feeling ready for the conference?
Yes, very much.
Good. And while waiting for this slide to be ready, we'll chit chat. No, it's me. This is me. I try to ask the best to prepare my presentation.
Do you have to go back through here, do you?
By the way, these two gentlemen are the organizers for this very important conference.
Do you know where they are?
The Dr. Basil and Dr. Stefan Poletti.
Is that one?
The agenda for my presentation today is actually to introduce you to what is IAEA and what is our goal, or my goal and aspirations. Thank you very much. And then the remark and then followed by the remark from the Dr. Chow. So I have done the introduction, and I would like to thank organizers again. In addition to the both co-chairs, I need to mention to the key organizers. Sorry, it is Mr. Diana Toll.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Christian Magonigal. Amanda Wallace, very important person, maybe still stuck to the registration desk. And thank you for all the cooperations of the entire Energy Center team and the University of Auckland student volunteers. Thank you so much. And I am reminded to remind you that please remember to tweet the hashtag IAEE20 New Zealand NZ, and the handle is at IA4EE. So got it? It's not written anywhere, so try to get it now. And then thank you very much for tweeting. I don't know how to tweet. I'm actually dependent on you. So let me introduce you to the IAEE. Our IAEE actually facilitates the worldwide information flow and exchange of ideas on energy issues. And then we facilitate the high quality research, and then try to develop the education of students and energy professionals. We accomplish our mission through providing leading edge publications. I'm going to introduce that, and then the electronic media, and organizing international and regional like this conferences and building networks of the energy concerned professionals. Those of you who are still studying, you are going into the professionals. And we have membership, over 4,000 members in over 110 countries. And we have 29 global IAEE affiliates. And as of now, we are establishing the India affiliate. And then we heard the news yesterday at the council that we are going to have Abu Dhabi affiliate in the future. And then the King of Saudi Arabia is also trying to set up their affiliate. So we are widening in its coverage. And then the conferences, the upper half, 2/3 are already done conferences. We had the international in Montreal last year, and we did have the Latin American conference in Buenos Aires, and then all the others, European, Ljubljana, and then others are all there, including the North American at Austin, Texas. And then this year, we are going to have the 3rd IAEE Southeast European Symposium in Albania, and the famous international in Paris in June. And all these information are available on our website. Of course, for the students, we have special benefits. All IAEE members' benefits, including the subscription to the famous journals, 2 journals, as well as the newsletter Energy Forum, and then access to the conference proceedings and participation in the working paper series. And for the students, you enjoy reduced conference fees and then scholarships to attend our conferences. Of course, networking is available, and if you are a student, you have the eligibility to take part in the student events, such as the student happy hour, which took place last night, and poster sessions, PhD day, and best paper awards. So make use of them, please. So these are the 2 journals and 1 newsletter. The Energy Journal, which is on your left, the very influential source of energy economics articles. Impact factor, we have enjoyed the 5-year impact factor of 2.739, and we also have the 10th anniversary approaching economics of energy and environmental policy, which is in the middle. This is a little bit different from the Energy Journal. journal. It has the policy-oriented attitude, and then it is scholarly and research-based, easy to read and accessible articles. So it is a rising source, and then the impact factor of last year of EEP was 2.034. It is improving every year. And then also an important source of information is the newsletter called IAEA Energy Forum. It's a thematically focused content, but it also covers, after the conferences, it covers the conferences, what happened, who were there, etc., etc. And then more importantly, it covers all the affiliate and chapter events and activities. So if you are interested in finding what events will happen, you go first to the Energy Forum, as well as check out the conference page of the website. And there are the special issues on the conferences. The website, have you ever visited our website? Yes, good. The website will give you all the information related to our journals or membership directly, or other conference information. And then also we do have the database on the energy economics education or the conference proceedings. Please check out the website. If you have some friends who are interested in applying for to become a member, let them visit our website. They can actually get the online membership application. Okay, to close my opening, I move on to the opening remarks. Well, our goals and aspirations are to engage with the business sector, governments, academics, and the future generation. So that is because the technologies for energy transitions are in hands of the industry. The supporting policies are in the hands of governments, and academics should be free of suspicions for an unbiased exchange of thoughts, and PhD students and young professionals must share your vision and dreams for the future. And then that is where the IAEA is your platform. Our neutral stance towards views and ideas is an ideal platform for facilitating such process. So please enjoy the next few days. The conference is promising. Now I officially announce the opening of this conference. So thank you very much for joining us, and then enjoy yourself.
ありがとう。
どういたしまして。
はい。Okay, so we will begin the opening plenary, and it's my pleasure to introduce Frank Jotzo from ANU. Frank is a professor at the ANU Crawford School of Public Policy, where he directs the Centre for Climate and Energy Policy. He's co-director of the Energy Transition Hub. He's an environmental economist, and his research focuses on climate change and energy in the context of economic reform and development. He's joint co-editor-in-chief of the journal Climate Policy and lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He's been involved in many policy research and advisory exercises, and has advised national and state governments. So please welcome Frank to the floor.
Thanks very much, Basil. Thanks very much, Steve, and everyone in the organising committee. Great stuff, and yeah, really appreciate that I'm able to speak to you all here this morning. So I'll get the advertisements out of the way. You've already mentioned the Climate Policy Journal, which I co-edit. It's a very general journal, but we do run energy economics articles where they have a clear policy implication and are accessible to a sort of non-economist audience. so please send us your best manuscripts before you send them to the Society's Journals. No, I'm only joking, sorry. And Energy Transition Hub, which is a program supported by the Australian and German governments, and that's what's currently paying the bills. So if you indulge me, I've prepared some sort of fairly wide-ranging remarks about energy transition, which should be the topic of this session, right? So the context for all of this, of course, the net zero emissions initiative. I'm not sure, is this microphone doing anything? Yes? Okay, I'll keep it then. Decarbonisation objectives really in most countries, and a lot of confusion as to how we'll go about that and how we'll get there. Very rapid technological change, of course, in particular in zero carbon technologies. Increasing kind of policy concern and societal concern, I think we can say, about the structural adjustment that comes with large-scale energy systems change, right? So I think that's fair to say. Certainly, looking at this from an Australian perspective, this is increasingly the core focus really in the energy transition is, how we're going to swing this in a way that is actually economically beneficial and socially acceptable in the regions that will see change as a result of that, and then of course all the implications for policies, institutions and regulation that flow from that. So to drive home the magnitude of the change envisaged here, right, go to the climate change literature and analysis. And so the Paris Agreement spells out a very clear long-term objective for greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, and that is to keep global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees. So we're around about 1.1 degrees now, and if we're serious about keeping it to less than 2 degrees, then we're looking at net zero carbon dioxide emissions globally by around about the middle of the century. Okay, and so that's that kind of trajectory for global CO2 emissions that you'll have to imagine for that, right? So now you may well say the prospects of keeping global warming to below 2 are very slim, but even 2.5 or thereabouts, which climate scientists will tell you is entirely unacceptable. Even 2.5 would imply a really dramatic shift in global energy systems. How are we going to get there? Well, it's useful to think of the pillars of decarbonisation of an economy and the world economy. First of all, zero emissions electricity. Secondly, electrify everything. Okay, transport, buildings, industry, everything that you can, electrify it. Okay. Thirdly, deal with remaining emissions, in industry and agriculture, principally. And then fourth, compensate whatever remains in terms of emissions and do the net bit of the net zero by drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Traditionally, we think of that as afforestation, reforestation, soil carbon, but increasingly, we're also thinking of that as technological solutions, and actually where it comes back to the energy system. All the way at the end of the spectrum is direct capture of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then storing that carbon dioxide or making product out of it, synthetic fuels, or in fact storing it as solid carbon. And that again becomes an energy storage because it's essentially a very energy intensive process. So what does the future look like? And this comes very much from an Australian perspective, but much of this is applicable globally. We see solar and wind plus storage really poised to take over from coal as well as gas. Come back to that in a second. In Australia, you'd probably say that shift will happen, right, irrespective of policy drivers. The question is how quickly it'll happen and how messy the transition will be, and that's really the roles for policy and regulation to make it a bit faster and a bit less messy. Transport, well, electrification is a really big issue there. Transport, energy use is massive, of course. Once we electrify a lot of that, whether by batteries or via hydrogen, you're looking at a massively increased draw on the system there for electricity. Aviation even is on the horizon in that basket as well. In industry, of course, renewables can replace fossil fuels to a great extent as well. Again, though, massive investment needs and big questions as to what will drive that. Now, when you think of the Australian grid in a decarbonised system, this is some analysis that we had modelled by CSIRO at the time, 5 years ago or so for Australia. If you did this now, it wouldn't look fundamentally different, except that the role for solar would be even larger. So what are we looking at? We're looking at phasing out all of the existing coal generation. We're looking at greatly increased electricity supply, and we're looking at producing all of that probably from renewable energy. Okay, and so that of course is a massive transition and massive investment volumes. If you look at the current grid in Australia, it's still dominated by coal. This is taken from a very nifty online source at opennem.org, which makes accessible in real-time data, the electricity supply data from the Australian energy market operator. About 2/3 coal still, but renewables, especially solar, growing very fast. If you look at the grid supply in South Australia, it's a really interesting picture. For last, 10 days or so, South Australia has just about been islanded because of the grid connection into Victoria being down. It's not meant to be that way, but so here you have sort of a system of the future. It's running on average at just over 50% solar and wind. The rest is gas. Normally you'd have a significant amount of interconnection in Victoria, but not at this point. And this runs without very large-scale storage assets. There's the world's biggest battery in there, but that's not your long-term storage. So it's actually interesting to see that kind of grid at the end of the main grid being run pretty much autonomously on wind, solar, and gas. Energy storage will be increasingly important and raises some important questions in terms of the economics of it and the regulatory settings. In Australia, there's a plan for a massive new pumped hydro scheme, which would be government-owned, built and operated, which in itself raises a number of questions about cost effectiveness and operating regimes as well, right? So once you have a plant like that, should it be run like a profit-maximizing private entity competing with other private assets, or should it perhaps be run as part of the grid infrastructure? If so, what should be the objective? Is this about minimizing wholesale prices, for example? Right? If so, who benefits from that? Grid-scale batteries, we've got really quite significant investment going in Australia. The existing very large-scale battery in South Australia, by all accounts, is working very profitably and providing an enormous amount of grid stabilization services as well. We would estimate that flexible demand response will play an increasingly important role, especially in systems where intermittent renewables play an important role. So in industry, but also in the building sector and the household sector, right? All pool pumps should be on demand response, really. EVs, right? So when we think ahead to the decarbonized future, we will have a lot of electric mobility, and it's actually quite amazing the amount of battery storage you've got there. So if you do the numbers for New Zealand, a bit over 4 million cars, just cars, not even counting light trucks and things at the moment, take, sort of mid-range, 40 kilowatt hours per car, and you've got a storage capacity that well exceeds a full day's electricity generation in New Zealand, right? Just in the batteries of the cars, if every car in New Zealand Zealand was an electric car, right? And so now, of course, it's fairly obvious that you will want to use that massive storage resource effectively and efficiently on the grid, right? Vehicle to grid. Right, so it's no longer just a question of optimal charging, right? So for those cars not to be charged at peak demand times, but also for all of these cars and light trucks and so on and so forth, feedback into the grid. Very exciting and a really interesting set of questions as to regulation and market settings, right? To make that worthwhile for consumers, while on the other hand, not burdening each individual car owner with needing to think about, when am I going to charge my car, right? So quite exciting opportunities there. What we're even more excited about in Australia, and I guess at the ANU institution in particular, is the vision of renewable energy trade. Okay, so Ken Baldwin leads that program at the ANU, and Ken will no doubt tell you more about it. But the idea here is, we've got dramatically differing comparative advantage in zero carbon energy production. Okay, traditionally we think of renewable energy as something that's localized, is grid-based. Okay, but as renewable energy, particularly from solar, gets cheaper and cheaper, it comes within reach, right? Not just to connect that across continental scale. Right? And on that front, there's at least two ideas or consortia in Australia that would send, one probably, is currently talking about building a massive solar power plant in the outback, sending the energy by cable to Singapore. But go beyond that and ship renewable energy in the form of hydrogen and or ammonia, right? And the customers would be the high population density countries in the high latitudes, Korea, Japan, Germany, these kinds of places. There's active interests on the customer side of the equation there. And then as well, minerals and metals processing are candidates for, to base that on renewable energy. And if we did that at large scale, then in Australia, for example, we would have a comparative advantage in that. And that in fact, is the most positive point of engagement with our present federal government in Australia, right? Because it's not about shutting things down, it's about building things up and creating new, potentially very large export industries. Okay, how are we going for time? I'm sorry, I didn't catch another 8 minutes. Okay, so I'll be brief on this. We will see exit of the coal-fired power fleet, and some research that we're currently doing is not out yet. We posit that this exit will likely happen faster rather than more slowly, because the economics of the existing coal-fired power fleet is eroding on account of more renewables being put in and on account of the renewables that are coming in being able to be constructed at very low LCOEs. Okay? And so unless governments choose to actively stand in the way, we'll likely see relatively rapid coal exit. There's all sorts of ruptures that are being caused by that. Okay, so the instinct of most politicians, governments, is to try and stem the tide, right? Put the finger in the dike, and we've had some amazing episodes really in Australia over recent years of government trying to, putting enormous pressure on individual utilities to keep coal-fired power plants open for longer. Right? If you grab Tim Nelson in a break, he'll be able to tell you a little bit about some of these things that AGL, for example, experienced. There's talk about subsidies for refurbishing or overhauling coal plants to keep them on grid for longer. There's talk among some sections of the political spectrum of building new coal-fired power stations. So none of the commercial will do that, right? And so the response is, let's have government build and operate it. Because, so there's an enormous kind of debate about these things. It's partly driven by fear of regional decline in coal areas. which directly links to electoral concerns, of course, right? So these are regionally concentrated and visible, and there's jobs in it. And it's partly driven by fear of losing that existing economic opportunity, and that's what we see play out. And so, really, technological progress is moving ahead far faster than most governments are able to manage, right? And so, really, I think that's actually an apt illustration of what we see unfolding. And really, the danger is that we'll have governments, trying to step on the brake, right, rather than to actually drive. Okay, so what is needed for governance of energy transition? We need better understanding. We need some level of society-wide agreement. Then we need implementation, policy, regulation. It's a really complex picture, right? We're beginning to understand as economists that it's much more complex than just putting in a price on carbon, okay? And then we need ongoing assessment and monitoring. I guess as a community, we're particularly strong on the understanding bit of the equation, but we should perhaps use opportunities to get more involved in the assessment, monitoring, and ongoing feedback to the policy process. Just a few things I wanted to mention. We, as a community, we need to be really, really conscious that we tend to get it wrong, and that the future may unfold in different ways than we think, and all the rest of it, and you'll be aware of it. But, I love every year's update of, the IAEA's central policy or existing policy scenario for this is the annual additions of solar photovoltaics, right? It increases by 20, 30, 40, 50% every year, and every year the IAEA central scenario says, well, that's it. We're going to track linearly from here on in, and we don't. And so, yes, I know these are not forecasts, but nevertheless, they are taken as such by much of the policy community. I dug back into the spreadsheets behind the modelling for the Garno review, the Australia's big sort of climate change policy assessment exercise done in 2008, right? And there was a reference case, right? Electricity sector emissions keep growing. There was a 3-degree case and a 2-degree case, which, were proxied by a sort of medium carbon price and a very high carbon price. All right? The red and the green line show those as electricity sector CO2 emissions as modelled back in 2008. And where are we really tracking with Australia's CO2 emissions from electricity? Well, in between the moderate and the strong policy scenario, and in terms of the slope of emissions that we're expecting over the next few years now, that slope is actually about equal to that under the strong policy scenario, which has a carbon price creeping up to $100 a tonne. Of course, the carbon price is zero, and we've seen relatively little policy achieving that. It's all technological change, right? So what we see unfold is right outside of the envelope of what we would have ever posited as a sensitivity analysis even, right? And so that kind of, being aware that things may well turn out differently. And so national pathways for decarbonisation are a big thing, right? They're very useful. Okay, mapping out how this could all fit together, right? Big demand for that. As part of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, one of the innovations in the next forthcoming report, which will come out in early 2022 and is currently out for expert review. So if you're interested to see in which direction that is heading, just head to the IPCC website, sign up as an expert reviewer, have a look at a few of the chapters, and maybe put in some comments also if you feel so inclined. IPCC will have a couple of chapters, two new types of chapters on national transition pathways for decarbonisation. Policy, like I said, much more than carbon pricing, technology standards really important, public investment increasingly important. I think a strong role for us as energy economists to call out the kinds of investments that look like they might be a massive waste of public money, but to also call out the opportunities where perhaps the market isn't well placed to provide that investment efficiently. And then finally, assessment. So monitoring how we're going with that transition, what is going right, what is going wrong. I do like to point to the German energy transition monitoring. There's actually a nice institution there which has academic and think tank experts providing an annual systematic assessment of how that country's energy transition is tracking against defined goals and indicators, right? And that provides an independent kind of reality check on what government is up to. And the questions that have to be asked are not just progress against targets and whether these targets and policies need to be adjusted, but also what are economic impacts, what are impacts on international competitiveness, what are impacts on energy prices and costs, and how are these impacts distributed between different groups of consumers. So thanks very much.
So if we could just hold questions, so we'll just ask the panellists to wait behind after their presentation, and we'll have questions, Q&A then. Thank you very much, Frank. Do you want to start?
I just grab my notebook.
Okay. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Ivan Diaz-Rainey. Okay. Ivan is an associate professor at the University of Otago. He's associate editor of financial regulation and compliance, and he has conducted research, policy consultation in the UK, ECMI, and a number of other countries, including organisations such as the OECD. His research has been published in leading journals. He's published in Energy Economics and the Energy Journal. Current research interests include financial regulation, financial integration, climate, carbon and energy finance. So would you please welcome Ivan to the stage.
I may need some help finding my PowerPoint. No. There it is. Yeah. Thank you very much, Basil. Kia ora. Welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. University of Otago is probably not as well known as University of Auckland, but we're amongst the top universities in New Zealand, in the top two. It's a real pleasure to be here at Otago. I lead this team called the Climate and Energy Finance Group. I'll talk a little bit more about this halfway through my presentation. So sort of trying to link it in from Frank, I think one of the things that we got from there is the scale of if we are going to stay within 2 degrees or 2.5 degrees, it's the scale of the transition that has to happen. And there's a kind of, we've had a bit of energy finance, we've had expertise in energy finance for quite some time, but there is this growing subject area, new focus on climate finance. And so in this talk, I'm going to give you a sense of to what degree investors are going to increasingly influence energy transition. If we go back to a lot of the discussions that we have around energy transition, we see the industry, the energy industry, and we see energy markets, and we see policy. We have those discussions. But we all know in the world that investors play a huge role. And investors are increasingly interested in energy transition, both from an investment opportunity, but also from a risk perspective. I work in this area, and it's very, very difficult to keep up at the moment. So there really is an alphabet soup of initiatives and groups being established where investors, regulators, financial regulators are pushing, looking to explore the risks and opportunities related to climate finance. So we have, for instance, a task force for climate-related disclosures, which is part of the Financial Stability Board, which is essentially the club of financial regulators around the world. And they've come up with recommendations in terms of what companies should disclose around climate risk. We've got UNPRI, United Nations Principles of Responsible Investing. I'll talk more about those. We've got the Climate Action 100. I've just got back from Paris. I was talking at the Elysee Palace, where 3 trillion worth of sovereign funds are really interested in understanding what climate risk is in their portfolios and how they can facilitate energy transition. We then have things like the Climate Bond Initiative and the IGCC, which is a group of institutional investors that want to try to align their investment portfolios to climate change, and they manage about 30 trillion. And not to forget New Zealand, we have the Aotearoa Circle, Sustainable Finance Initiative. I'm on the technical working group of that, and they're looking to see how we can green our financial system. So there is, I guess what I'm trying to say, this is an area where investors are taking an increased focus, and I would argue that actually, Frank's picture of the horse, and government trying to hang on, one of the things is I think investors are going to overtake governments and play a massive role in energy transition. So I guess I don't really, when I present this to finance audiences, I need to explain to them what energy transition is. I don't really need to explain it to this audience. What I will assume is that you don't know too much about finance and investment. Okay, so some of these slides I use for a master's level class in climate and energy finance. Don't worry, I won't be testing you at the end of it. So we know that you look at the pictures of transitions, and transition leads to lots of nice pictures, but what comes out of it is scale. And if we're going to make the transition, it's going to require huge amounts of investment. So, how much investment do we need? So let's get some numbers around this. Yeah? And, there's quite a broad range of numbers out there. So, you have the CEDIS, Clean Trillion. CEDIS is a sort of advocacy think tank tied to investors. They came up with a Clean Trillion. The IPCC report in 2018, the 1.5 degree, sort of came up with a 2.4 trillion. These are big numbers. Yeah, we're talking trillions, not billions. Yeah. So from an investment perspective, this creates opportunities. We need to try and get capital that way. But from secondary markets, Finance 101, primary markets is the first time a bond or a share or a loan is issued. This is when companies first get money. Then you have a financial product that can be bought and said that's secondary markets. So from a primary market perspective, this is a massive opportunity. Yeah, corporate financiers doing structuring, equity offerings and finance offerings, bonds and so on should be very busy for 2-3 decades. From a secondary market perspective, we know it creates winners and losers. All we have to do is look at Exxon stock price over the last 5 years, in terms of potential losses that can arise from that. But for investors, it also creates a lot of uncertainties. And again, Frank brought out this, it's the speed and the nature of energy transition. Energy used to be easy for investors, yeah? An energy utility was like a bond. They paid a dividend. There was very little risk there. Okay? Now they've changed fundamentally. There's a lot more risk in energy utilities. So there are risks. And for investors, especially if you're a passive investor, in other words, you have to hold an index. You have to hold a proportion of the index. Even if you believe in climate change and you would like to sell out, you can't. Yeah, because you invest as a proportion of the index. And, one of the things I saw from my time in Paris is that we've got some investors that are very aware of the issues about energy transition and climate risks, others that know next to nothing. So there's a big diversity. So, if you have a diversity of views, it's going to make pricing assets a lot harder. Okay. So we figured that the numbers are big, 2.4 to 1.5 trillion, something like that. So we're talking in the trillions. Let's take the 2.4 IPCC. So how much money has been going into energy transition? And this is energy efficiency. So it really excludes, this is investment in renewables, so it really excludes energy efficiency. But it's around 280 billion per year. Yeah? Deployment is increasing, but the amount of money going towards renewables has stayed relatively flat. But one of the things is that there's falling costs, falling LCOEs. Okay? But, that's very far away from the 2.4 trillion. Yeah? So investment needs to be scaled up 4, 6-fold. There's various estimates to where it needs to go. So is there enough money out there? Should we just go home and give up? So if we take how much capital is managed by our pension funds, sovereign wealth funds around the world, it's in excess of 100 trillion. Estimates range from 100 trillion, 120 trillion. So, there is quite a lot of capital out there. Yeah? So we think of the 2.4 trillion investment that we need to make every year. There should be enough. If we take a 3% yield on that 100 trillion, just a yield, just a return, should be enough to invest in energy transition. Of course, not all the money is going to go that way, and there's big barriers to do so. To put it, I would also argue very strongly that investors are the only game in town. If we're going to have energy transition, the only people that have the sort of money are institutional investors. Yeah? To put it into perspective, global defense spending is about 1.8 trillion per year. Okay? So if you think every government's going to stop spending on military and invest in energy transition, well, good luck to you. I'm not with you there. Yeah? I think the institutional investors are the only game in town. There is a little bit of good luck, good news. Institutional investors, so this is the UN Principles of Responsible Investing. I'll tell you a little bit more what those are in the next slide. But this has shown a radical increase where about 90 trillion, okay, of that 100 trillion say that they're going to take environmental, social, and governance issues in their investment decisions. Okay, so that's a huge amount. That's most of the money in the world is saying we're going to take the environment, social, and governance issue, but in our context, environment into account. Okay, and so sounds quite promising. Yeah. So what are the UN principles of responsible investing? So it means that investors need to take ESG issues, environment, social, and governance issue, into their investment analysis. They also need to incorporate it into their ownership policies. So if you followed the sector, a lot of the energy companies have been facing shareholder resolutions, asking them to disclose more on climate change. And part of it is driven by this statement in Principle 2 of UNPRI. So am I a cheerleader for ESG? No, ESG has a lot of problems. Yeah, there's no agreed definition of ESG. It is associated with better investment performance, but there is no agreed definition of what ESG is, or even the E. A lot of the data that's gathered is through surveys, so there's a lot of problems with that. ESG indices have a lot of issues as well. They have a lot of biases, a size bias, a disclosure bias, and sector biases. So a good example here is on the E side, on